Hey, this is Chris Crawford with Chris Crawford Knives. I've got a knife here that a friend of mine sent me to take a look at and see if I could help him figure out what was going on with it. He was having a problem where when the knife was together and the blade was open and closed, the blade was really wanting to drag on the spring, or kind of felt like almost it was scraping into it. The thing was, the tang on the blade and everything was smooth. The finish on the spring was nice and smooth. So what was going on? What was the problem? You might think, well, there's a dry joint or whatever, but he'd put oil in it and this kind of stuff, and nothing seemed to help. So he sent it to me, and I took it apart. Now, when I received it last night, it was all together. When I received it last night and first started opening and closing it, it felt pretty smooth. But the more I opened and closed it, the rougher it got, or the more it felt like it was scraping against the spring. And so I have an idea of what's going on, and I want to kind of go through this little diagnosis of what I think the problem was. So hopefully it'll help him, but hopefully it'll help others that may be experiencing some of the same problems with their slip joints. All right, so the first thing I did is I took the knife apart, as you can see here, and I took some layout dye and painted it on the end of the spring. And so I also did that on the tang of the blade. Now, the reason I did this is because I want to see, you know what, I may hit that blade tang just a little bit more. But what I wanted to do is I wanted to see where the tang of the blade was coming in contact with the spring. And that's going to tell me what the problem may be. So we'll give that here just a second to dry. We'll start putting the knife together. All right, well, let's see. This blade has a bushing, so I guess I need to go ahead and get that in. And I think I'm probably just going to be able to push this pin in here. All right, so here's the knife together. Now let's check the action on it. Okay, it feels really smooth. So why was it grinding last night? I mean, it definitely feels smoother right now. It was grinding pretty good last night. What's the difference? Well, I didn't do anything to the knife, first of all, except for put that layout fluid on there. Now, so I got to thinking about why, what may be going on. Well, one problem is that the blade is shifting. Now, I noticed last night when I opened the knife and started working it, initially, it was pretty smooth, but the more I worked it, the rougher it got. Well, I think here's the reason. If you'll watch the back of the knife there, when the knife is squeezed together, it's smooth. But the more that the knife opens and closes, we start seeing a separation. You see this? I did that a few times, and we have quite a gap. What's happening is as the knife is opening and closing, the blade is wanting to walk. Okay, the blade is wanting to move away from the spring. Now, what that tells me right there is that everything in there is not square. So either the tang of the blade is not square to the spring, or the spring's not square, or the holes are not square that the pins are going through, but something's going on that's making everything shift. All right, so let's take the knife back apart real quick. And let's look at our blade and spring. If we look at the blade and spring here, we can see that it has, it actually looks like it went all the way across. I think the reason it looks like that we're getting an even, that it looks like it's even on here, is because that blade was walking. Now, I bet you if I hit this again with some layout fluid and cover this up, and then we put it back together, and I pinch the knife so that it doesn't allow the blade to walk, if I keep the bolsters pinched together, then I believe we're going to see it rubbing in one place. We'll confirm that here in just a second. So let's take a look at the blade. Now, if we look at the blade, we can clearly see, and hopefully you can pick this up on camera, that only about half of the layout fluid is worn away. So see, from here over it's worn away, from the middle back this way it's not worn away. Now, like I said, it could be that this is not 90 degrees, like the across the back is not 90 degrees. There, maybe you can see that, to the sides. And that would cause that. Or it could be that the spring's not. Either one of these could cause it to walk like that. But I feel like it's probably the blade, since it's catching that one side like that. All right, let's put it back together real quick. And then I'm going to hold the bolsters together and see if we have the same issue. All right. Oh, I guess I need to put my blade in. Sorry about that. I hold all my pins in place, keep them from dropping. All right, and then let's get our back pin in. Okay. All right, now this time I'm going to hold the knife together like this and open it and close it. And this is going to prevent it from separating. All right, take that back apart. And let's look at the spring. All right, now you may not be able to see this, but we've got one spot right here that's rubbing, so it's not all the way across, it's just in this one spot, which pretty much makes me think that it is the tang of the blade is high on one side and it's scraping right there. So what I think's happening is, as the blade was getting shifted over, as the edge was coming on there, it was just really grinding. That edge was just really catching in that spring and making it feel like it was grinding like that. Now, so you may be asking the question, well, how come when it was put together last night and it was doing it so bad, but even today when I was putting it together and I was opening it and closing it, opening it and closing it, I didn't have the same problem. One thing I think is the pins. Now, when I put it together a few minutes ago, I'm using pieces of old drill rod, and so these are drill bits that are broken off. I love using drill bits because they're hard, they don't bend, they don't get out of form, and I'll use these for all my testing, because when you're testing a knife, you're putting it together and taking it apart a whole lot. But I don't use these in the final knife. I'll put in whatever pin material I'm using. I may be wrong, but I think these pins are nickel silver, and it might be hard to tell, but I think these pins are a little deformed, and it may just be from going in and out of the knife and maybe having to use pliers to pull them in or out, or hammers to push them in, or whatever. So I think the fact that the pins were deformed may be also causing the blade to shift a little bit. And with it shifting like that, it might have been catching more. But one of the things that I think probably attributes to it, as much as the fact that these pieces may not be ground 90 degrees, or perpendicular, is the fact that there's a good bit of play in some of these holes. Okay, so here's an 1/8 inch hole, and I'm using this long nickel silver rod because to make it more obvious. We get all the way out here, we can see there's a good bit of play in there, but also in the bushing. So if we look at the bushing, now hopefully I'm not sliding the bushing too bad, but there is play. You can feel it maybe more than you can see it in there. And if we take the bushing and we put it into the blade, okay, now you're not going to be able to see this, but I can move it. There's a little bit of movement in there. So it's kind of floating free in there. I mean, it's fine, but it's in there enough that it's creating some some space. Now, if we put these things together, like, let's see, put this on here, put that on there, those in there together like that. Look how much movement we have. So there's a lot of movement. So even when this pin gets in there between the handle materials, and you may be counting on the handles to kind of hold the blade flat or hold it level, but the thing is, when you get the pressure of that spring kicking against it, you still there's a lot of play in there that could be contributing to the problem. So what's the solution? Well, first thing is try to get better tolerance on your drilling. Okay, so drill, if you have to, drill a hole slightly smaller and get a precision reamer. I use that sometime. Honestly, I don't use it all the time. A lot of times I just go, like if I'm doing an 1/8 inch hole, I just go with like a really good high quality 1/8 inch drill bit, one that's not worn out, one that's not going to be messing the hole up. If I start finding holes are getting sloppy, I might go to a new bit. But that's one thing that'll help. Also, just making sure your bushing fits tighter. But also, just try to make sure everything's square. And I want to show you something over here on my grinder. And so maybe you'll be able to see this. Change my camera here. Apologize for this. So this is just a little angle finder. I picked this up at, I believe, Home Depot. I'm going to get me a digital one. It has a digital readout, but this one works pretty good. So I can put it on here, and I've got this little pointer that I can move and line up with the white line. And so I get that lined up, and now if I look at where the pointer is at about 0.5. So it's about 0.5 off 0 degrees here. And I'm only really worried about this from a relative perspective because now I want to see what my platen is. And so when I look at my platen looks like it's about 89.5. So I'm probably 1 degree off from my rest and my platen. And so, if I were going to be working on those parts, like on here, right here, I might really want to try to get my platen 90 degrees to this. Now, before I would use a disc grinder, but my disc grinder burned out and I'm waiting on another one to come in. So, man, hopefully I'll get that thing back, and that's gonna help. But if you just got a grinder and a platen, do that. Make sure that it's 90 degrees. That it's perpendicular, that the rest is perpendicular to the platen. And then also on your drill press, just try to make sure that everything is. And I guess it would depend on your drill press, the way you'd have to dress it. But make sure that your holes are perpendicular. And then make sure you have the right size drill bits. And so I think these things, taken into consideration, these things taken together probably all contribute a little bit to the issue that he was having. Now, what is the solution? Well, let me get back over here to the knife. All right. Sorry about that noise, if that was really noisy moving the tripod. What can he do on this knife? Well, on this knife, you could grind, you could try to flatten this, get that flat and get this part right here flat, and then try to get your spring right here flat. The only problem is on this particular one is that the spring may be a little bit weak. And do you recall how I was able basically just to push the back pin in? Usually I have to put my knife in a vise, and I have a little brass jig that I insert in there and squeeze the vise down. If you've seen any of the videos, Slipjoint videos, you've seen that, but squeeze the vise down to put the spring under load so that I can then put the blade in. I didn't have to do it in this case, and the reason was because the spring is not putting that much pressure. Because the spring's not putting that much pressure, if you take anything away from here and here and here, the spring's probably not going to work at all. Now, one solution might be to reheat treat the spring. Also, depending on the hardness of the spring, you could form the spring down. You might put it in a vise and take some kind of tool or something and torque it and get it, get a little more bend in the spring and see if that will help. So hopefully my rambling didn't go on too long, but maybe from this you can get an idea of the type of things that can cause a problem with the blade just not seeming to work. I mean, when you put this knife together and you look at it and everything looks like, man, it should be working great. Why does it keep grinding? This is like really nice and smooth and everything, and it's oiled. Why is it grinding? Well, the problem is I think the blade was trying to walk off of the spring, and that happens a lot. And that's one of the things to really look for. All right, well, thanks a lot.